In this tutorial, I'll be covering how to make a basic procedural moss material inside of Unreal 4. As we drag the moss amount up, moss grows on the surface, focusing first on areas that are darkest on the base material. It's worth noting that during this tutorial, I'll only be using textures found in the starter content, so it's very easy to follow along at home. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is create a material. I'm going to call mine material_moss. Then we need to set up a parameter for our base texture. Now this will be a texture sample parameter 2D. And we're going to call that base texture. Next we're going to make a scalar parameter. And we're going to name this moss amount. We need to change the slider min and max to clamp it between the values of 0 and 1. Now we're going to perform a little bit of mathematics on this parameter to get it in a form that's going to be more usable to us. Firstly, we're going to set up a divide node, plugging in the moss amount to B and dragging off a constant for A. Now this is a value you're going to need to play around a little bit with yourself to try and get what you like. I usually go about a value of 4. Then we're going to multiply this with our base texture, but not with the full texture, only with the red channel. And what this will do is it will get us a grayscale rather than a color image. So what we're doing here, I should have mentioned earlier, is setting up a mask so we can control which areas are going to be mossy and which areas aren't. If we drag that in here, then we can see at the moment it's all white. But if we drag our slider down to 0.5 and change our base texture to something a little bit more close to what we want, we're starting to see a little bit of progress being made. But it's going to get better very soon. Next we need to clamp the value here between 0 and 1. And this is going to be important for our next step, which is going to be to raise the black levels. And the node for that is raise black levels by percentage. And we're going to want to drag off a constant here. And set that to something really high, like 100. And what that's going to do is massively increase the contrast. So now you can see we've got areas that are heavily black and areas that are heavily white. But it looks a little bit off. And the reason why it looks off is that it's inverted. So what we're going to want to do is use a 1 minus node, which is a math node, in order to invert this texture. Like so. Now the white is in the cracks and the black is in the area that's not in the cracks. And that's exactly what we want. The final step of the mask is to clamp it again so we can use this later on as a mask, and that needs to be in a 0 to 1 space. We can press C now to comment this. This step's completely optional. There's no reason you need to do it, but I like to keep a clean workspace. So the next thing we need to do is to set up our actual textures. So I'm going to copy paste my base texture and then set up another 3 parameter texture 2Ds. and I'm going to name those moss texture. Base normal and moss normal, and it'll become very clear in just a minute why we're doing that. It's probably a good idea to set up defaults for these as well. Now there's no reason you need to do this, but it just makes it a little bit easier to work with. So now we have base values for our normals and our textures. All that's left to do is do a linear interpolation, which you'll find if you just type lerp into the top bar. And we're going to want to feed each of these pairs in as A and B, and then feed in our mask as the alpha into each of these instances. Once we plug these into the base color and the normal, we suddenly see that we're getting somewhere. All that's left to do now is to give the moss a wet sheen to make it look a bit more realistic. So the way we're going to do that is add another 2 lerp nodes. For metallic and roughness. And we're going to use the same alphas as we've been using before on those as well. Now, these can just be done with constants. So for the roughness, we're going to increase the roughness of the base texture to about 0.8 and down the roughness of the moss to about 0.2, and that's already going to make it fairly shiny. Actually no, I changed my mind. I want the roughness of the rocks to be about 0.5. Yeah, that looks nice. So now it's got still got a bit of a sheen to it, bit of a polished look. And then we're going to raise the moss's metallic levels to about 0.2 and keep the metallic of the rock to nothing. Now, in reality, moss isn't metallic at all, but I just find it gives it that nice sort of sheen and shininess that you're just not going to get otherwise. Obviously, you probably want to set up maps for your metallic and roughness if you're not planning on using like rocky textures or textures that have roughly the same roughness all the time. And that's one of the advantages of this workflow, is that you can really apply it to any base texture that you want. Alright, so now that we're done setting up the material, all that's left to do is obviously save and apply. And then we're going to right click it in the editor and create a material instance called instance moss. And this is where we really get to work. You can see now we can change the moss amount as we've been doing before, but we can also change the textures to be something different if you wanted to. You only have to change the stone and the normals here. And another interesting application is that you can also change the moss to something else. I find that this can work quite well for frost or snow, as well as for moss. So yeah, that's just the basic setup. Obviously you could go a lot further than this, but you know, this is a good way to get started.